Verkehrspolizei, stehen!
Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Each week as you enter this timeless land, one of these many worlds will open to you. Frontierland. Tall tales and true from the legendary past. Tomorrowland. Promise of things to come. Adventureland. The wonder world of nature's own realm. Fantasyland. The happiest kingdom of them all. Presenting this week. Here to introduce you to this new series is Walt Disney.
In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has upon our daily lives. Discoveries that were miracles a few short years ago are accepted as commonplace today. Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow. One of man's oldest dreams has been the desire for space travel, to travel to other worlds. Until recently, this seemed to be an impossibility. But great new discoveries have brought us to the threshold of a new frontier, the frontier of interplanetary space. In this Tomorrowland series, we are combining the tools of our trade with the knowledge of the scientists to give a factual picture of the latest plans for man's newest adventure. Here's Director Ward Kimball to tell you about it.
In working with engineers and scientists, we have found that there are many different opinions as to how we will eventually cross the space frontier. However, there's one point all of them seem to agree upon, and that is whether we use chemical fuels or atomic energy, it will be a rocket-powered ship that will finally take man into space. So, to set the stage for the part the rocket will play in the coming conquest of space, our artists have searched back through history and traced the rocket and various space travel ideas from their earliest beginnings. The first thing we found out was that the rocket is not such a modern invention after all. In fact, its history began way back in the 13th century. It was in China, to be exact, at the Battle of Kai Feng Fu. A little over 500 years later, Sir Isaac Newton explained this phenomenon by saying, "For every action force, there is always an equal but opposite reaction force." Sir Isaac's statement can best be illustrated by showing what happens to our pet dog when he sneezes. For every action, there is an opposite but equal reaction. This same principle applies when we light an ordinary skyrocket. Action, reaction. However, gunpowder is not the only propellant that demonstrates the action-reaction law. There was a time when steam was seriously considered as a means of rocket propulsion. Typifying this idea was Charles Golightly's aerial steam horse. Early inventors soon realized that steam rockets would be too heavy to fly, so they returned to designs utilizing gunpowder. These ideas made many successful flights, on paper. In 1865, Jules Verne fired the imagination of the world with his first book on space travel. It was called From the Earth to the Moon. Mr. Verne used a very interesting device in getting his heroes to the moon. He shot them through space inside an enormous artillery projectile. It was Verne Story that inspired George Méliès to create the first space travel motion picture in 1902. The first man to associate space travel with the use of rocket power was Hermann Gonsfeld. His idea was to have the rocket pull the ship instead of push it. This conception was quite unique, but only an inventor's dream. However, a few decades later, a real milestone in rocket history was passed when the American professor Robert H. Goddard introduced a liquid fuel rocket, which used gasoline and liquid oxygen instead of gunpowder. This small forerunner of our large present-day rockets actually rose 60 feet into a wintry New England sky. These experiments led to the founding of the American Rocket Society to advance the science of rocket propulsion. At the same time, the German professor Hermann Oberth wrote, "Theoretically, there is no limit to the size of a rocket which uses liquid fuel." In 1929, Oberth designed a giant rocket ship for the Fritz Lang movie, Frau im Mond. The Girl in the Moon. During the late 1920s and early 30s, we saw an era of feverish activity among the rocket experimenters. Almost every type of vehicle was adapted to rocket power. Here is the first successful flight of a rocket-powered airplane. Rocket-powered autos were fast, but presented quite a smoke problem. There were railroad rockets and nautical rockets. Some fired and some backfired. These early attempts met with varying degrees of success. Meanwhile, in Germany, a group of serious-minded engineers founded a new society for space travel and succeeded in building rockets which finally reached an altitude of 1/2 mile. Soon after this, the German Army established its own rocket program. The development of the first rocket missiles followed. This accelerated rocket program culminated in the creation of the forerunner of spaceships to come, the V-2. Even though there were a few mishaps, the V-2 emerged at the end of the Second World War as the most successful rocket yet devised by man. 75 of these captured V-2s were brought to our rocket proving ground at White Sands, New Mexico in 1945. Here, exhaustive studies and test firings were made to aid us in mapping our own newly created rocket program. It wasn't long before the sands of New Mexico shook to the roaring blast of the Viking, the Corporal, the Aerobee, and other American rockets. Rocket firing is an awesome demonstration of tremendous power. I think we should find out how it works. One of the best authorities on this subject is the rocket historian Willie Ley. Here Mr. Ley explains the operation of a rocket motor to some of the artists working on the picture.
This is an actual propulsion unit from a V2. And this strange-looking device is both the heart and muscle of a rocket, its motor. Now, all earthbound engines have to burn oxygen from the surrounding atmosphere. But the high-altitude rocket motor has to work in outer space where there is no oxygen. To overcome this, we carry a tank of liquid oxygen here. When burned with a fuel, in this case alcohol, it produces an intensely hot, torch-like flame that would quickly melt the motor. However, we cool the motor by first circulating the alcohol fuel around it, until this fuel finally reaches the point where it is sprayed, along with the oxygen, into the combustion chamber. When this steady flow of alcohol and oxygen is ignited, it produces a continuous explosion which blasts the rocket away in the opposite direction. Here again we have action and reaction. If this motor is placed in a streamlined hull with suitable controls, it can reach a high altitude in a very short time. The V2 rocket motor only operates 65 seconds to a height of 20 miles. But then the V2 has gathered so much speed that it will coast upward to an altitude of 114 miles before gravity begins to pull it back to Earth. Notice that the rocket does not nose over in the thin upper air, but it falls tail first until it re-enters the denser atmosphere where the air, acting on the tail fins, turns the rocket nose down. Early in 1949, space history was made when the payload in the nose of a V2 was a small rocket called the WAC Corporal. When the large V2 reached its maximum speed, the smaller rocket was ignited. This additional boost in speed enabled the WAC Corporal to set a new high-altitude record of 250 miles. This day marked the first time that a man-made object reached outer space. This was accomplished by using a double rocket, then secretly known as Project Bomber. However, we refer to it as a two-step or two-stage rocket.
Is it possible to build a three-stage rocket?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's the next logical step. Here's a rocket I have designed that has 3 stages. It would stand about 70 feet high or a little taller than the old V2. Here you can see the 3 sections. each one having its own rocket motor. If somebody will please make a sketch for me, perhaps I can explain how it will work. Good. Here we show our rocket in its launching position. The first great blast starts to lift it, and after gaining initial speed, the first section is cast off at 20 miles up. At 45 miles, the second stage is released. The third stage now fires until it reaches an altitude of 70 miles. At this point, our rocket has now attained a tremendous speed and the motor shuts off. Its forward momentum would carry it straight out into space if it were not for the Earth's gravity. This downward pull of gravity bends the upward course of the rocket into a curved path. And if the rocket's speed going away from the Earth creates enough centrifugal force to balance this pull of gravity, our rocket will continue coasting in its curved path around the Earth indefinitely.
Mr. Lay, is there another way we can illustrate this?
Yes, let's explain it this way. If the rocket were to move at a slower speed, the pull of gravity would soon overcome the rocket's momentum and it would return to Earth here. If we add a little more speed, the path of the rocket becomes longer and it goes farther before it returns to Earth here. So if we have our rocket go fast enough, it will eventually follow a curve which matches the curvature of the Earth and will not fall back. We might say that the rocket falls around the Earth as long as it maintains sufficient speed.
But how does it maintain this speed with the motor shut off?
Remember, our rocket is traveling above the atmosphere in space, where there is no air friction to slow it down.
How fast does it have to go to stay up there?
Now that depends on how high we want the rocket to be as it circles the Earth. Let's use the altitude of 1,075 miles. Because at this height, the rocket will have to go nearly 16,000 miles per hour and will make a complete trip around the world every 2 hours. A few adjustments in its course will be necessary, but this can be accomplished from the ground by remote control, after which the rocket will continue to coast freely in space forever.
In other words, the rocket will stay up there just like the moon.
Yes, it will circle the globe as a man-made satellite.
What is the purpose of having this satellite up there?
Having this instrument-carrying rocket moving around the Earth will give us a lot of important information which we'll need before we dare let a man make his first trip into space. To run the scientific apparatus contained in the satellite, a mirror will focus the intense rays of the sun onto a silicon battery, converting solar energy into electricity. There will be a television camera to give pictures of the Earth as it appears from 1,075 miles up. We will collect very important data on the effects of the mysterious cosmic rays. Even hits by meteorites the size of a grain of sand will be recorded. Every 2 hours, when the rocket moves over the North Pole, its radio will transmit a stream of data to a receiving station below. This will be the first outpost in man's conquest of space.
One of the big question marks of future space travel will be man himself. How he will react mentally and physically to this unearthly experience is the concern of a new field of science called space medicine. Helping us illustrate this interesting problem is the scientist most noted for his pioneering work in space medicine, Dr. Heinz Haber.
When man steps into his rocket ship and leaves the Earth behind, he must be well equipped to survive in the hostile realm of outer space. To portray the complex problems of space medicine, we have designed a sort of common man. A man just like you and me. We will find out what will happen to him on a trip into space. In a way, he's going to be our space guinea pig. That makes him a brand new biological species. I think we should call him Homo sapiens extraterrestrialis, or spaceman. Since he was picked at random, we cannot tell whether he will be able to tolerate the tremendous stresses to be placed upon him when the rocket ship is fired into space. He gets an inkling of these stresses when he rides in an automobile. When he steps on the accelerator, the car moves forward and he is gently pressed against the back of the seat. His body resists any change of motion. When he comes to a stop, his body tends to move forward. On a test rocket sled, which is pushed forward at tremendous accelerations, the force of inertia is much stronger. We are all familiar with centrifugal force. We duplicate this force in the laboratory by using human centrifuges. These machines artificially create on man the crushing pressure he will have to endure in a rocket takeoff from Earth. His body weight increases until he blacks out and finally loses consciousness. From tests like these, we have learned that man will have to assume a reclining position when his rocket takes off into space. In this attitude, the stresses will be more evenly distributed along his body. He will then be able to tolerate pressures of up to 9 times his weight or more, as it occurs in a rising rocket. When the rocket engine finally stops, man will face his next big problem: weightlessness. Without support, he will be floating freely, drifting, tumbling, and twisting helplessly. In space, a man, a feather, a bubble, or a piece of iron will have the same weight, or rather, no weight at all. However, man is designed to live with gravity, the down-pulling force which Sir Isaac Newton first explained.
Any two bodies attract each other with a force which is proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. Or, what goes up must come down.
Loud alarm signals sound throughout the nervous system whenever we are in danger of falling or stumbling. But weightlessness is not such an unearthly experience. We become weightless for a short while in a dive, on a roller coaster, or in an elevator. But if we remove the support by cutting the cable, we produce the exact feeling of weightlessness in space. It will take iron nerves waiting for the impact that never comes. We can only hope that man in space will eventually get used to this feeling of falling constantly. Without weight, our notions of up and down no longer exist. Man will probably have trouble orienting himself. Confusion such as this is likely to produce nausea. Some people may become victims of a serious form of space sickness. Weightless man in space must learn to guide himself only with his eyes. Beginners can combat dizziness by fixing their eyes upon one single object. The spaceman must learn to move with utmost caution. His muscles are adjusted to normal earthbound gravity. In space, any casual action will be violently magnified. He must coordinate himself under an entirely new set of rules. He can hardly avoid spinning constantly. When he crouches into a compact mass, he will spin faster. If he spreads his arms and legs, the spinning will slow down. After considerable practice, man will be able to master the art of swimming through the air within the rocket ship. For the beginner, a web of ropes might be provided. He must learn that slow, relaxed, careful movements are essential. After his first few encounters with the problems of weightlessness, he will no doubt try to normalize his life. Even the air he breathes will be weightless. Natural circulation of air does not exist, and there is danger of suffocating in one's own exhalations. Air must never be allowed to become stagnant in a spaceship. Circulation must be maintained by constant ventilation. Since all objects are also without weight in a coasting rocket ship, they must be safely secured by bolts and clamps. For handling large, bulky objects, man will have to anchor himself in some fashion. But as it takes force to overcome the object's inertia and set it in motion, it takes equally as much force to stop it once it is moving. On Earth, we are not exposed to dangers from space owing to the protective layer of our atmosphere. But up there, even the hull of the ship would not shield man against the possible hazards of the mysterious cosmic rays. These tiny bullets from the infinity of space will continually penetrate everything. They may prove to be harmful to man. The most energetic of these atomic rays might feel like stings as they shoot through the body. However, there are other bullets in space that may be of still greater concern. Meteorites. These marauders of space travel at speeds up to 150,000 miles per hour. But if one should puncture the walls of the ship, our air supply would rapidly escape through the opening into the vacuum of outer space. Without protection, man could last not more than 15 seconds before losing consciousness. Also, in the intense radiation of the sun, he would soon broil on the one side and freeze on the other. In the void of space, he will have to wear a space suit. This specially designed outfit must be a flexible, airtight unit carrying sufficient oxygen. Featuring built-in all-purpose equipment, it will afford protection and maneuverability outside the ship. Propulsion will be by means of a small portable rocket unit. With proper manipulation of this jet device, even the most subtle movements can be made.
Action, reaction.
Dining under conditions of weightlessness will present new and surprising problems. Liquids will be particularly annoying. They will not pour. They must be transferred by titration tubes. This tube will contain the liquid until it is forced into the desired location. Unless liquids are kept in leak-proof containers, they will escape and float in ball shapes around the cabin, finally coating all surfaces with a wet film. Plastic bottles will be used so that liquids can be squeezed out. Food will be cooked in closed containers by radio frequency short wave. Space etiquette will call for the extensive use of sugar tongs. Man can overindulge in space, but he will never be overweight. To relieve the inevitable tensions of space travel, we must provide suitable recreation. A game of three-dimensional pool could be particularly relaxing. Sleeping will be a new and unique experience. a space traveler will not need a pillow or mattress. His bed will consist of a net enclosure to prevent drifting in his sleep. How will man's subconscious mind react to his first experiences with space travel? Will he not suddenly be aware of his precarious situation, trapped in a tiny metal box, floating through the incomprehensible nothingness of space? We do not know. We must plan intelligently if these pioneers of space are to survive and return to Earth safely. The conquest of space will depend to a great degree on the research and findings of this important new field of science, space medicine.
To the engineer, spaceflight poses two problems. The first is, of course, to build a rocket ship. The second, and no less important, is to prepare and train the men who are to fly the future rocket ships and to provide suitable working conditions that will enable them to survive in space. To help show you what is being done to solve these problems, we have called upon one of the foremost exponents of space travel, Dr. Wernher von Braun, who is at present the chief of the Guided Missile Division of the Army's Rocket Center at Redstone Arsenal. He was also overall director of the development of the original V-2 rocket.
The training methods for future space flight and the special equipment needed for survival are much like those of present high-altitude flying. And the experiments we are making today are helping us to solve the more complex problems to come. Take the present-day pressurized flying suit, for example. It has been designed for use at extremely high altitudes and is a forerunner of the suits we will wear when we make that trip to the moon. To give you an idea of how engineers and medical men are working hand in hand, here are a few examples of the research that's being conducted at this time. This pressure suit is being worn in a test chamber where the air pressure can be dropped suddenly. Notice that the water boils at this low pressure, even though it is only at normal body temperature. Blood would do the same without the protection of the suit. In other tests, without the suit, where the drop in air pressure is less severe, we see that the body still reacts violently to a sudden decrease in pressure. Lieutenant Colonel John P. Stapp of the United States Air Force has subjected himself to the tremendous forces of a rocket sled that reaches a speed of over 632 miles per hour. The sled stops so quickly that Colonel Stapp's body becomes 35 times heavier than normal. From these tests, we have learned that men can take much greater acceleration forces than crew members of a rocket ship will undergo on a takeoff. Today's aircraft are so fast and so complicated that it has already become routine to train the crews on the ground without risking lives or equipment. This is done with a device called a flight simulator. Here the crews experience all the sensations of an extended flight. The crews of future rocket ships will train much the same way. We will use a simulator on a centrifuge and employ an astrosphere to train the celestial navigators for our coming space flights. Now here's a model of my design for a 4-stage orbital rocket ship. Compared to the unmanned instrument rocket, it is quite large. But the overall size and weight of the rocket is mainly determined by the 11 tons weight of this top section. This weight dictates the amount of fuel and the numbers of motors needed to produce enough power to equalize the gravitational pull of the Earth. The payload in the top section will consist of 10 crew members plus equipment. Notice the wings, small rocket motor, and landing gears. This is a section that must ultimately return the men to the Earth safely. To produce the energy needed to hurl this stage into the orbit, we need these 3 additional rocket-powered sections. Here we have a cutaway drawing of our rocket, showing the location of the fuel and the motors of each section. The first stage carries 1,060 tons of fuel, and its 29 motors will lift the entire weight of the ship vertically off the ground. The second stage has 8 motors and carries 155 tons of fuel. It will be dropped when its speed has reached 14,300 miles per hour. The next is our third stage, with only 1 rocket motor and 13 tons of fuel. The third stage gives the passenger section the final kick to attain the orbit. It will not be separated from the passenger section until just before the return flight. The third stage will be left in space, and a very small motor in the winged fourth stage will return the ship to the atmosphere so it can glide back to the base. If we were to start today on an organized and well-supported space program, I believe a practical passenger rocket could be built and tested within 10 years. Of course, it would be foolish to rush headlong into building a 4-stage rocket, man it with a crew, and attempt to fire it into an orbit without first following a step-by-step research and development program. Let's illustrate this with the help of a few pictures. First, we would design and build the 4th stage, and then tow it into the air to test it as a glider. This would also allow the crews to practice. Next, low-altitude flights would be made, firing the small rocket motor in the 4th stage. This would also give the crew more and more training. Following that, the 3rd and 2nd stages would be constructed and tested very thoroughly on the ground, after which they would be joined to the passenger section so that faster and longer flights could be made up to speeds of about 12,000 miles per hour. The only thing remaining would be the building and ground testing of the huge 1st stage. Then there would be no more test flights. When all the sections are joined together, the ship and its crew will be ready for man's first flight in space. Let's look ahead a few years and see how this might be accomplished.
There it is, a small atoll of coral islands in the Pacific, where man is dedicated to just one cause, the conquest of space. Here below us, a small city has been created to house the scientists, engineers, and technicians on whose shoulders rests the tremendous responsibility for this great adventure. This is the Rocket Assembly Building, with tracks running to the launching site. Only 48 hours remain until firing time. Our spaceship moves ponderously toward the firing site. After the ship is securely anchored over the blast tunnel, the elevator spar is raised into place for the final pre-flight check and fueling. This is the blockhouse, the control center for Operation Space Flight. Here, the oscilloscopes, radar scopes, computers, and tracking devices are the brain and nervous system for the rocket. Dancing patterns of light will record every detail of the blast-off and climb into space. In the windowless blockhouse, observation is by periscope. Through a system of worldwide radar stations, electronic eyes will always be focused on the rocket as it orbits around the globe every 2 hours. The tracking radars report ready and are standing by. The optical tracking stations are poised and ready to follow the rocket in its upward flight. As 0 hour approaches, the painstaking work of the checkout crew continues. The ship and every piece of its equipment is being checked and rechecked.
Blockhouse, can you hear me? Will you give me that stage 2 separation signal again. Okay now, over.
Now swivel motor stage 3 to pitch right. Okay, now give me the left.
Attention all personnel. It is now X minus 2 hours. Fueling crew, take your stations. Safety area will be cleared by all personnel.
In the pits, the required quantity of fuel is preset. The pumps will deliver 1,230 tons of hydrazine and red fuming nitric acid into the tanks of the waiting rocket. It is now X minus 20 minutes.
Flight crew, report aboard rocket. Flight crew, report aboard rocket.
After years of careful preparation, testing men and materials, this is the final payoff. Now man will bet his life against the unknown dangers of space travel. Human reactions are not precise enough. Therefore, once the launching timer is started, the entire takeoff and flight into outer space will be controlled automatically.
X minus 5 minutes. Clear the firing area. Clear the firing area.
X minus 90 seconds. X minus 30 seconds. X minus 20 seconds. X minus 15 seconds. X minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The total firing time has been 5 minutes. The ship will now coast for 51 minutes before the adaptation maneuver begins. At over 60 miles above the Earth, the crew members experience the sensation of weightlessness for the first time.
Blockhouse to XR1. Your cutoff altitude is 63.9 miles. Distance from launching pad, 705 miles. Velocity, 18,467 miles per hour. Angle of elevation, 4 minutes of arc. Plane of your ellipse of ascent incline, 66 degrees, 32 minutes, 2 seconds to plane of equator. Out.
51 minutes later and halfway around the world, the rocket is coasted to its maximum altitude of 1,075 miles. Its speed has diminished to 14,770 miles per hour. The navigator must now take a bearing on 2 fixed stars. He will line up the ship for the adaptation maneuver, which will drive it into a circular orbit around the Earth. Electronic controls will fire the rocket motor at the exact second the ship reaches the proper position. The ship and crew are now coasting freely and silently through space. Here, man is no longer earthbound. From his new vantage point of over 1,000 miles high, he sees the Earth as a vast rolling sphere, upon which the oceans and continents are reduced to simple patterns of light and dark. Great cloud formations will appear as small patches of snow. Evidence of man's existence is almost invisible. Large cities can be seen only with the aid of powerful optical equipment. Meteorologists will make studies for long-range weather forecasting. The science of astrophysics will welcome the clear views of our moon and planets, unhampered by atmospheric disturbances. Space medicine will benefit from tests conducted with new type spacesuits.
Air Force Kettler replacement calling XR1. We have you in radar contact at 107 miles due south this station at 29. Estimate you at Prestwick Station, Delta at 37.
Tests and observations by the crew will lay the groundwork for the future construction of a space station and will add to our knowledge of many sciences.
Instrument rocket approaching from 3 o'clock high.
At a pre-calculated time, the rocket's path will cross that of the instrument carrier, sent into space a few years before. 22 hours after takeoff, our spaceship has made 11 revolutions around the world. It is now time to make the return trip. The engineer releases the third stage. It'll be left circling in space. All tests are now concluded. The navigator checks the ship's position for return firing. 1 minute to go. The automatic firing timer is set. The ship is lined up so the blast of the motor will be against its forward motion. This will slow the rocket's speed and cause it to begin its long glide back to Earth. The ship is now moving 1,000 miles per hour slower. After coasting halfway around the world, the rocket will leave the vacuum of space and sweep into the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere, where air friction will gradually reduce the rocket's speed. When the ship drops to an altitude of 50 miles, air pressure will build up on the control surfaces. For the first time in the entire flight, the captain will be able to fly the rocket as a normal plane. Air friction begins to send the skin temperature of the rocket climbing until the ship glows cherry red at 1,350 degrees. The double hull and refrigeration keep the crew from perishing. The returning rocket continues the long glide down into the lower atmosphere, its temperature gradually dropping to normal as airspeed diminishes. Mission completed. Man has taken his first great stride forward in the conquest of space. His next goal will be the exploration of the moon, then the planets, and the infinite universe beyond. Walt Disney's Disneyland.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are.
Each week as you enter this timeless land, one of these many worlds will open to you. Frontierland. Tall tales and true from the legendary past. Tomorrowland. Promise of things to come. Adventureland. The wonder world of nature's own realm. Fantasyland, the happiest kingdom of them all. Presenting this week,
at Disneyland Park, the realm devoted to things of the future is called Tomorrowland. One of the popular attractions here is our simulated rocket trip around the moon. After entering the Disneyland spaceport, visitors may experience the thrills that space travelers of the future will encounter when rocket trips to the moon become a daily routine. However, scientists tell us that it will be many years before space travel becomes a reality. After consulting with the scientists, our artists and studio technicians have prepared a factual picture of how the coming conquest of the moon will be accomplished. Here to tell you about it is Director Ward Kimball.
When we hear the exciting news of how the rocket scientists of today are preparing for tomorrow's trip to the moon, we must remember that such a trip has long been the dream of many men since history began. But before we consider the scientific plans for a trip to the moon, let us first show you, as sort of a prologue, the results of our research into the legends and facts and foibles, superstitions of man and the moon. Roll the moon sequence, please.
This is the moon. It shines over the great cities. It illuminates the countryside, and its reflection shimmers on lakes and oceans. This is the moon that saw life begin on Earth millions of years ago. As primeval man watched the moon in the night sky, it became to him an object of curiosity. In legend, he tells the story of an old man who, while digging, discovered a small, shiny object. As he held it in his hands, it grew and grew, and finally escaped into the sky to become the moon. To primitive man, the moon was somewhat of a personality. Sometimes he saw in it the face of another man, or a woman. Some ancient aborigines thought they saw a four-eyed leopard. Perhaps the greatest mystery to our ancestors was the moon's strange ability to change its shape. The early Hindus believed that it was Chandrashka, the god of night, slowly turning his lamp as he moved across the sky. The Aegeans, on the other hand, thought the moon was a silver shield, reflecting the seas and mountains of the earth. Moon worship was an important part of many ancient religions. The Sumerians called the moon Nana, and the golden calf with crescent horns was a symbol of reverence. Here stands the Egyptian moon god Thoth, the reckoner of time. 12 times between the annual rise of the Nile, the moon grew to fullness. This gave Egypt one of the first lunar year calendars. And here is Diana, the Grecian moon goddess, whose beauty inspired the Romans to build a silver temple in her honor. To some primitive races, an eclipse was a mysterious and terrible thing to behold. They believed a giant serpent was devouring the sun's light, so they danced and made great noises to frighten the moon beast away. And he would go away. The first book devoted completely to the moon was a parchment by Plutarch. He said the moon was simply a smaller Earth, but unlike the Earth, its inhabitants were demons. These words of Plutarch inspired one Lucian of Samosata to record what was perhaps the first science fiction story. He tells of a very strange journey to the moon in 160 A.D. A ship went sailing on western seas through the Pillars of Hercules. She sailed through a realm as dark as night, pursuing her course of lunar flight. The Moon King held his hand aloft and cried to far and near, "Begone, ye earthling creatures bold. There are no women here." There followed upon the face of the earth a period called the Dark Ages. For centuries, the light of knowledge was extinguished, and only a fleeting mention of the moon was made. Moon. Then there was the great event of 1609. Galileo Galilei built a telescope and made the first close-up observations of the moon. He excitedly announced that he had observed the moon as another world, complete with mountains and seas. When the astronomer-mathematician Johannes Kepler heard of Galileo's startling observations, he immediately set to work on a book about the moon called Somnium, or Sleep. In this very imaginative account, Kepler goes to sleep during an eclipse and is kidnapped by moon demons. Because they cannot bear the light of the sun, they migrate to and from the earth, using the moon's shadow for a bridge. Here on the moon, Kepler wakes to see a fur-covered moon creature emerging during the cool of the evening. Amazing. Kepler's experience inspired the English bishop Francis Godwin to write a book called The Man in the Moon. His hero is a Spanish gentleman exiled on St. Helena, who escapes by building a contraption that harnesses the efforts of large swan-like birds. He realizes too late that these birds are of a rare type that migrate all the way to the moon. However, the trip is interesting, and he finds that the moon's inhabitants vary in size according to their rank. Their only language is music. A few years later, the flamboyant Cyrano de Bergerac makes comments on the possibility of traveling to the moon. His close friends scoff at the idea. This drives Cyrano to prove his point by writing a unique science fiction moon trip. His own personal device for getting to the moon is a string of bottles containing dew. Anyone knows that as the sun rises, so does the morning dew, and so does Cyrano. His scheme works so well that he has to discard some of the dew bottles for fear of overshooting his mark. But alas, he drops one too many, misses the moon, and lands in Canada. The natives are very hostile. He has to escape. What to do? Build a rocket, of course. This time, he is more successful. When his fuel supply gives out, the moon's gravity helps him make a triumphant lunar landing. In 1835, a sensational news report appeared in the New York Sun. Sir John Herschel, noted astronomer, had discovered life on the moon. The account stated that Sir John, aided by a powerful new telescope, was able to study the moon from a distance of 50 feet. He observed fantastic rock formations, strange plants, and hairy man-like creatures with bat wings who walked about in a dignified manner. There were animals, too, grazing bison and one-horned unigoats who were very playful. However, this whole story was the imaginative product of an overzealous reporter. It was a complete hoax, a moon hoax. Here we see the leading characters in Jules Verne's Victorian trip around the moon. 3 adventurers are given a fraternal send-off by the brothers of the Baltimore Gun Club. After a very hazardous trip, the daring spacemen are given a hearty reception by the brothers of the Baltimore Gun Club. Frequent reference to the moon is made in great literature. Shakespearean societies have long delighted in such lunar lyrics as Romeo, "Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon," Juliet, Oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb. Othello, it is the very era of the moon. She comes more nearer earth than she was wont, and makes men mad. The moon is the source of many odd beliefs and superstitions. One of the oldest sayings is that the moon is made of green cheese, or that it is the resting place for all articles lost on Earth. It is said, if a man sees a new moon through a window, misfortune will befall him. Or if he cuts his hair under a new moon, it will grow back too fast. A secret wish made to a new moon will come true. But it is unlucky to see the new moon over the right shoulder. A new moon is the time to begin things. This is a good time to get married, to build a house, and move into it. Caesar once said that the dark of the moon is the best time to start a battle. When the moon is on the wane, stuff your feather bed. Wash your linen, mow your grass, cut your timber. Some farmers believe that the moon governs the planting of crops. They say that root-type crops should be planted during the dark of the moon, while the light of the full moon is the best time to plant the crops that grow above the ground. Also, medicines and tonics are said to be more efficient if taken during the full moon. In autumn, the full moon is the harvest moon. If the moon is a silver shield, be not afraid to reap your field. But if she rises haloed round, soon we'll tread on deluged ground. Pale moon doth rain, red moon doth blow, white moon doth neither rain nor snow. It has been said that money exposed to the dark of the moon will increase as the moon becomes full. Some even believe that the left hind foot of a rabbit procured in a graveyard during the dark of the moon will bring good luck. We are warned that sleeping in the lunar light will produce lunacy. From this supposition evolved such expressions as loony, lunatic, moonsick, moon mad, and moonstruck. Little children love nursery rhymes, particularly verses about the moon.
The man in the moon came down too soon and asked his way to Morridge. He went to the south and burned his mouth to suffering cold peach porridge. Hey, diddle diddle, the cat in the fiddle. The cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the beast ran away with the squirrel. I see the moon, and the moon sees me. God bless the moon, and God bless me.
The moon is the symbol of love and romance. It has long been the inspiration for love songs the world over. It is very simple to write a moon song. First, of course, you must have the moon, preferably in the month of June. Someone to croon, and someone to write the tune. Add the word spoon, some flowers in bloom, and maybe even a honeymoon. Hit it, boys.
I see the moon shining down on lovers, spooning in the gloom. I see the moon on a sandy dune by a blue lagoon. All the hollyhocks in bloom fill the air with sweet perfume. Soon, pretty soon, love will bloom and you will croon. I see the moon that shines in June like a macaroon. I see the moon, we will sing it soon, rhyme it all with moon. Soon, spoon, June and moon, there'll always be a honeymoon. Honey, 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 moon, moon, moon. I see the moon that shines in June like a macaroon. I see the moon, we will sing a tune, rhyme it all with moon. Soon, spoon, June and moon, there'll always be a honeymoon. There'll always be a honeymoon.
Honey, honey, honeymoon with Daniel Boone.
There'll always be a honeymoon.
This, then, is the moon. Like a flower in heaven's high bower, with silent delight, sits and smiles on the night.
Astronomers tell us that the Earth we live on and the moon we see in the sky are but tiny specks in a tremendous universe that contains billions upon billions of stars and other worlds. Now, one of these tiny little specks, or stars, is our own sun. And circling around the sun is a system of 9 major planets. Except for Mercury and Venus, all of the planets have 1 or more moons. The giant Jupiter has 12, Saturn 9, Mars 2, and of course our Earth only 1. How the Earth and moon came to be is a mystery. Astronomers speculate that about 4 billion years ago, our own universe was once a tremendous swirling cloud of cosmic gases and dust. Within this great nebula, smaller whirlpools of gaseous matter formed. These eddies of dust and hot gases gradually condensed to form our sun and planets. It is believed that at this early stage, the Earth and moon evolved, with the moon finally cooling to become a small, barren satellite 2,000 miles in diameter and circling the Earth once a month at a distance of 240,000 miles. Because the sun lights only half of the circling moon, the moon seems to gradually change shape during its monthly trip around the Earth. When the moon moves between the Earth and the sun, we see nothing but the dark shadow side. This is called the new moon. Each night, as the moon progresses along its circular path, we see slightly more of the lighted half. When it reaches a point on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun, it appears to us as a full moon. Then, as the moon continues its journey, we begin to see less and less of the illuminated half until finally it completes its monthly trip and becomes a new moon once again. Sometimes the circular path of the moon carries it through the shadow of the Earth, and we observe the weird effect known as an eclipse of the moon. On other rare occasions, during daylight hours, the invisible moon passes squarely between the Earth and the sun, and we are treated to the spectacle of a solar eclipse. Evidence of the moon's influence on our daily lives is here demonstrated. The gravitational pull the moon exerts on the oceans of our Earth causes daily high and low tides around the world. These various movements of our moon through the sky have been observed and predicted for centuries. Today, with the help of modern telescopes and cameras, we are able to get a close-up view of the very unusual details on the moon's surface. The prominent dark areas we see even without a telescope are large, flat plains surrounded by mountain ranges and craters. Some of the rugged mountain peaks rise straight up to 35,000 feet, and the craters range in size from small potholes to giant openings measuring 146 miles across. Scientists attribute the moon's rather rough surface to either volcanic action or to explosive hits by meteorites when the moon was in a molten stage. We've never seen the other side of the moon, but experts agree that it probably looks much like the side which always faces us. The moon is a dead world without atmosphere, a silent, unchanging desert where temperatures drop to 250 degrees below zero on the shadow side and boil at over 200 degrees in the direct light of the sun. But uninviting as it seems to be, man's restless search for knowledge of the universe will certainly make the moon one of his first objectives in the exploration of space. Here to reveal a plan for a trip around the moon is the chief of the guided missile development at the United States Army's Redstone Arsenal, Dr. Werner von Braun.
A voyage around the moon must be made in two phases. A rocket ship taking off from the Earth's surface will use almost all the fuel it can carry just to attain a speed great enough to balance the pull of gravity. Unpowered, it will then keep circling the Earth in an orbit outside of the atmosphere. This is the first phase. However, if we can refuel the ship in this orbit with fuel brought up by cargo rocket ships, it can set out on the second phase, the trip around the moon and back. To facilitate this refueling operation, we will establish an advanced base in the orbit, 1,000 miles above the Earth. This advanced base, or space station, will be headquarters for the final ascent to the moon. Our space satellite will have the shape of a wheel, measuring 200 feet across. Its outside rim will contain living and working quarters for a crew of 50 men. Just below the radio and radar antenna is the atomic reactor. Its heat will be used to drive a turbo generator, which supplies the station with electricity. Access to the station will be through an airlock in the hub. The three large spokes are elevator shafts, and the small pipes are used as condensers for the turbo generator and the air conditioning plant. The entire wheel will slowly rotate at 3 revolutions per minute. The resulting centrifugal force will produce an artificial gravity for the men in the rim. Notice that the floors are placed so that the men stand with their heads toward the hub. The wheel is divided into 9 sections. The first section is headquarters and communications. The next section will be for Earth weather observation and prediction. Military reconnaissance experts, aided by powerful optical and radar telescopes, will observe every point on the globe as the space station makes its complete trip around the Earth every 2 hours. Next is the emergency hospital section. And then the astronomy division, where men will keep an eye on the rocket ship as it makes its trip around the moon. The rest of the space station will house calculating machines, maintenance facilities, air conditioning equipment, living quarters, and even a botanical and zoological laboratory. This entire space station will have to be prefabricated and tested on the ground. After dismantling, it will be transported in pieces up to the orbit. For the difficult job of reassembling the structure, we have provided a new type of spacesuit. Using gyros and 2 small rocket motors, the operator can tilt and move in any direction. Located outside will be 7 remotely controlled mechanical arms, each a specialized tool. By rotating himself within the spacesuit, the operator can use any of the arms for the variety of tasks in assembling the space station. When the day arrives for construction to begin, the thousands of parts for the space station will be transported to the orbit by our multi-stage rockets. We merely replace the winged passenger section with a simple cargo-carrying nose. These cargo ships will be unmanned. A passenger rocket, 1,075 miles above the Earth, will guide each of the 12 approaching cargo rockets to their rendezvous in the orbit. This ship, which circles the Earth every 2 hours, will be the command post until after the space station is finished. On the ground, the first of the cargo rockets is ready for takeoff. When the guide ship reaches the correct position in the orbit, the cargo rocket is fired. While its motors are firing, the cargo rocket is controlled by an automatic pilot, like a guided missile. Up in space, the blast-off is observed with the aid of optical instruments. In the guide ship, the navigator locks his tracking radar on the rising cargo rocket. At about 24 miles altitude, the first stage breaks away and the second stage motors fire. 2 minutes later, the cargo head blasts away from the second stage and continues firing until its speed reaches 18,468 miles per hour. Automatically, the motor cuts off. Now, with the aid of remote controls, the navigator rotates the rising cargo rocket so that when it arrives later in the orbit, it will line up with the guide ship. Here, at 1,075 miles up, follows the most precise maneuver of the entire operation. The motor of the cargo rocket is fired again until its speed and course exactly match that of the guide ship. Radar remote control will enable this maneuver to be performed with a high degree of accuracy. 56 minutes have now elapsed since takeoff. The cargo ship is floating in space, 2,000 feet ahead of the guide ship. 2 crew members make their way to the cargo head to begin the unloading operation. First, the motor and tanks are detached. Then 2 bottle-type construction suits are removed from the hull. When fitted in the airlock, each of these construction suits will receive an operator. The sections of the cargo ship are moved back to make way for other supply rockets soon to arrive. Construction of the space wheel now begins. The sides of the cargo nose are mechanically separated. Built-in tanks of compressed air inflate this large plastic inner section of the hub. Thin metal plates are immediately clamped on the outside to protect it from meteors. The first workday in space draws to a close. Every 24 hours, another cargo rocket will arrive in the orbit. When the airlock is attached, the pressurized hub section can be used as temporary quarters for eating and sleeping. Each succeeding load is carefully scheduled so that the parts of the station can be assembled in correct order. Nylon ropes prevent the parts from slowly drifting away. Next, the atomic reactor is installed. The wheel begins to take shape now as the 3 main spokes and rim sections are joined together. Condenser pipes are fitted next so that the atomic reactor may be put in operation. Even though there's no apparent motion, everything in the orbit is hurtling around the Earth at 16,000 miles per hour. The shell of the station is completed. Now comes the delicate task of installing instruments and the multitude of equipment inside. Finally, 2 small rocket motors on the rim, blasting for a few seconds, will set the wheel in permanent motion to revolve 3 times a minute. As life on the station settles down to routine, the large reflecting telescopes will begin their work. These giant eyes relay pictures to television screens inside the station. One telescope photographs the surface of the Earth. Another keeps a constant watch on the Earth's weather, while the third is trained on our next objective, the Moon. The primary purpose of the first moon trip will be to test the methods and equipment to be used on later voyages into deep space. It will be essentially a scouting trip around the moon, and no landing will be attempted. To understand the plan of the trip, let us use this model. Here is the Earth with the moon circling around it. Since the first half of the trip will take 5 days, we must aim the ship well ahead of the moon so that they both arrive at about the same point in space at the same time. Here we have a scale drawing of the Earth with the moon 240,000 miles away. This is the elliptical path which our rocket ship will follow, going out, and coming back. For the rocket to leave the orbit of the space station, its speed will have to be increased by firing the rocket for a brief period of 10 minutes. The ship will then coast for 5 days. The Earth's gravity begins to slow the rocket down until 121 hours later, at a point within 60 miles of the moon's surface, it will begin to fall back toward the Earth. Gradually picking up speed, it will take another 5 days to coast back to the space station. This model will show you how our future moon rocket ship might be designed. It will be 53 feet in length, has no wings or tail surfaces, because it will be assembled and operated only in the vacuum of space. For the hull of the ship, we are adapting the cabin section of one of the Earth to Space Station passenger rockets. To the nose, we have added a small atomic reactor, which will drive a steam turbine and furnish electricity for the ship's instruments. This shield will protect the crew members from dangerous radiation. The ship's crew of 4 men will be placed 2 in the front and 2 back here. This is the directional radio radar antenna. Located underneath is the airlock for a spacesuit. The suit can be entered from inside the ship. Clustered around the rear of the ship are the 7 extra fuel tanks filled with hydrazine and nitric acid. All but the centrally located tank will be released when empty near the end of the return trip to cut down on dead weight. Even though we now have the theoretical knowledge to make a trip to the moon, it will be many years yet before our plans can fully materialize. However, let us imagine for a moment that the many problems have been solved and that after completing our space station, we are ready to begin our first voyage around the moon.
Ladies and gentlemen, through a worldwide network of radio and television, we are bringing you an on-the-spot account of the first expedition around the moon. Here at Space Station number 1, 1,000 miles above the Earth, the final preparations have all been made. Except for the time the rocket is on the other side of the moon, our radio and that of the station will be in constant communication with the ship during the 10-day voyage. As the moon ship stands by, the all-important pressurized spacesuit enters the rocket's airlock for the last time. During the trip, it'll be used only in the case of emergency. The captain is the last man to come aboard. He will direct the entire expedition from his position at the front of the ship. The navigator, with his specialized instruments, is responsible for plotting the unmarked path through space. The radio operator must maintain constant communication with the Earth on the space station. Finally, the rocket ship's motor and other mechanical functions will be the responsibility of the engineer. After final instrument check, the ship's crew lock themselves in position for the blastoff. Now, only minutes remain until firing time. The captain sets the automatic firing timer and reports to the space station.
RM1 to Station 1, firing timers engaged. We will begin power maneuver for departure in exactly 16 hours, 23 minutes, 47 seconds.
Roger, RM1, 16 hours, 23 minutes, 47 seconds, over.
Crew will secure and stand by for firing in 84 seconds. Acknowledge. Navigator, check. Radio okay. Engineer, check.
Storm 27-1 report. Over. Engineer to captain. Water pressure 447 psi, 3 low. Turbo pump 11,000 RPM, right on the button. Actuators steady. Guidance readings okay. Cabin pressure 0.3 psi low. Cabin temperature 72 degrees. Over.
This is Station 1 calling RM1. Our radar telescopes have charted your firing time and course. Give us a voice report for instrument error check. Over.
Well, we're on our way. Joe, how about another report?
Our firing time was 10 minutes, 0.35 seconds. Cutoff velocity, 21,888 miles per hour. Cutoff altitude, 1,765.2 miles. 1.6 low.
Okay. Now let's double check that star tracker with an optical and radar fix.
Right.
Captain, position check shows 0.7 miles below, 1.2 miles left, and 0.3 miles ahead of standard flight path. We have only a 0.03% error in azimuth reading.
Sounds good. Bill, let's transmit all your tape reports to the station.
We are interrupting our program to give you the following message. Moonship RM1, which left the space station a little over 51 hours ago, reports a distance of 169,000 miles from the Earth. The ship is traveling at 9,400 miles per hour, and deviations from the intended flight path have been so small that the captain reports no corrective power maneuver has been necessary as yet. We are happy to report all the crew are in good condition.
Check the console, Joe. Try to pick it up. Bill, is your electrical system working?
Emergency condition. Repeat. Verify. Over.
Meteor hit number 2 nitric acid tank. Pressure's dropping fast.
It's number 2, all right. Joe, put the air blowers on emergency power. Frank, get in the bottle chute and patch that hole. Don't use your motors near that leak. Try to reach it with the dripping arm.
Station 1 to RM1. Station 1 to RM1. Our instruments indicate emergency condition. Verify. Repeat. Verify. Over.
RM1 calling Station 1.
This is Station 1. Go ahead.
At 51 hours, 22 minutes elapsed flight time, registered hit by a small meteor. Puncture between Station 51 and 52, upper bulkhead of nitric acid tank number 2. Repairs are underway. RM1 to Station 1.
This is Station 1. Go ahead.
Meteor puncture sealed. Estimated diameter of meteor 1/16 of an inch. No injuries, equipment okay. Estimated loss 180 gallons of nitric acid. Proceeding on flight plan. Over and out. Station 1, this is RM1. At 110 hours, we are beginning measurements at rim of the moon for accurate position fixes. We are now picking up the unknown side of the moon. Bill, give me an altitude reading.
Okay. Radio altimeter reads 22,886 miles from the moon's surface.
Oh, we're moving in fast. Frank, have you got anything in that star occultation reading yet?
Just a moment, I'll run it through the computer. Captain, we're approaching the moon on ellipse 29. Course indicates collision with moon at 1:20 hours 56 minutes. Correction tape 340 must be used at 1:16 hours.
As the 116th hour approaches, the navigator must act quickly to avoid a collision with the moon. He starts the tape selector, which will automatically correct the rocket's course by firing the motors for a precise number of seconds.
RM1 to Station 1. At 116 hours, conducting power maneuver on correction tape 340. Out.
Captain, we're almost on the button. We'll pass the moon surface at 63 miles instead of 60.
Close enough. We'll make the correction on our return maneuver. Joe, set the spatial attitude control to keep us lined up with the flight path tangent. Stand by for observation schedule 17.
Station 1 to RM1. We acknowledge observation schedule 17. Checklist as follows. Green filter 93-B on electronic camera on upper astrodome. Use magnetic color tape on station 3, lower astrodome. Run 180-degree graph through contour mapper. Over.
The next few hours will constitute the most important phase of the trip. The moon is sweeping past the ship at great speed, and in the brief span of about 3 hours, all close-up observations of its unknown surface must be completed.
RM1, Station 1. We are now seeing the Earth disappear behind the moon's rim. This will be our last radio message until you see us on the other side.
Roger, RM1. Good luck.
I see what looks like a tremendous crater ahead. Bill, what does the contour mapper indicate?
Depth of crater is beyond range of contour mapper.
We'll reach the day and night terminator in 5 minutes. Frank, arm your flares and stand by to fire when I give the signal. Okay, Frank. Fire your flares at 3-minute intervals.
Captain, I'm getting a high Geiger count of 33 degrees.
My scintillation counter indicates a high degree of radioactivity on the same bearing.
Contour mapper shows a very unusual formation at about 15 degrees southern latitude
and meridian 210.
Get some flares in that area, quick. RM1 to Station 1, do you read us? Over.
Roger, RM1, we read you weak but clear. Over.
At 123 hours, we are observing the Earth emerging from behind the moon. We will leave moon shadow at 124 hours, 14 minutes. Our ETA in orbit is 241 hours, 27 minutes.
After 3 hours of total darkness, the ship breaks from the moon shadow into the glaring sunlight to continue on its 5-day return trip. The irresistible power of the Earth's gravity has now changed the rocket's direction and is pulling it with ever-increasing speed back to the space station.
Frank, start the gyro attitude control for the braking maneuver and give me a time set for firing. Check.
At 240 hours, preparations are being made to enter the orbit of the space station. The ship's direction is reversed so that the subsequent firing will slow the rocket's speed and jettison the empty fuel tanks.
Okay for firing. Guidance tape 264 inserted. Set firing timer for 241 hours, 49 minutes, 11 seconds.
Okay. Joe, set the tank release and report.
Fuel tank set for release.
Firing timer set. Stand by for power maneuver in 3-5 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed the first successful voyage into interplanetary space. This pioneer trip around the moon will soon be followed by an expedition which will actually land on the moon's surface. Even now, construction is going forward on the atomic-powered rocket ship that will challenge the limitless depths of space and solve the mystery of the red planet Mars.
Next week, our show will come to you from Fantasyland, and we will present our version of Charles Major's romantic novel, When Knighthood Was in Flower. Here now are a few highlights from that show.
Next week, from Fantasyland, Walt Disney invites you to witness the supreme spectacle of a fabulous era burst into life. It's an authentic chapter from the adventure-filled annals of history, When Knighthood Was in Flower, starring Glynis Johns as the beautiful Mary Tudor, and Richard Todd as Charles Brandon, a soldier of fortune. Meet James Robertson Justice, whose portrayal of the swashbuckling Henry VIII explodes on the screen in one of the century's most memorable performances.
I command you! You hear?
Yes, brother dear.
Are you coming?
No, brother dear.
Michael Gough as the treacherous Buckingham, England's deadliest swordsman. Witness one of the greatest love stories ever told, a romance that rocked both England and France when a commoner is forced to make love to a princess by her royal command.
By royal command?
And sovereign decree. Help me, Charles.
My lady, I beg of you.
Am I a statue on a pedestal?
zoom back through centuries of time to see a rough and ready wrestling match between Charles Brandon and the Duke of Buckingham. Be it the Princess Ball, when the scandalous La Volta dance shocks the Queen and is the King's delight. See Henry VIII in the role of huckster and haggler as he craftily tries to sell his sister to the King of France.
How much English gold does he want to sweeten the bargain?
500,000 crowns has been proposed.
500,000? Odds death, why doesn't that old usurer ask me to melt down my crown?
Be on hand when Mary seeks to escape to America to avoid becoming the Queen of France.
Are you alone, my lady?
I've run away.
You must be mad. A princess cannot run away. How many hours of grace do you think you'll have before the king's officers catch up with you?
No one saw me leave, not even Lady Margaret. And long before I can be apprehended, you and I will be on our way to the New World.
Here is all the pomp and pageantry that makes history books come alive. A factual story 3 years in the making. The golden age of chivalry lives again next week when Walt Disney presents When Knighthood Was in Flower. A new motion picture of rare enchantment will soon be showing in your favorite theater. It is Walt Disney's The Littlest Outlaw. It's a story of courage, of adventure, a story of unusual charm. It's Walt Disney's The Littlest Outlaw. Feature length, Technicolor, soon. This has been an ABC Television Network film presentation.
Hannes, Amtmann, Ezechiel und hier Peter. Siehst du, wie er schlägt?
Sowas kann man auch aus Wachs machen. Ich habe meins noch in der Brust.
Dann will ich es dir beweisen, Dummkopf, den Unterschied. Komm.